August 1945. The war is over, but hatred still burns hot. A small group of Japanese women stand trembling in a military kitchen, preparing rice for men who have every reason to want them dead. These aren't just any men. They're British soldiers who've survived years of torture, starvation, and unspeakable cruelty in Japanese prison camps. The women know what their own military did to these prisoners. They've heard the stories. They expect rage. They expect violence. They expect to be spat upon, cursed at, maybe worse. But what actually happened when these soldiers saw that simple meal? What happened when they took their first bites? The reaction was so unexpected, so powerful, that it shattered everything these women thought they knew about enemies, about war, about humanity itself. Before we dive into this extraordinary true story, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because this story transcends borders and time itself. This isn't just another World War II tale. This is the story of the exact moment when the human spirit proved stronger than propaganda, when a bowl of rice became more powerful than any weapon, and when tears of gratitude rewrote the narrative of hatred that had defined an entire generation. What you're about to hear challenges everything you think you know about forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of compassion in humanity's darkest hours. This is the story of Fumiko Nakamura, and how one meal changed the meaning of war itself. Fumiko was 42 years old in the summer of 1945, a widowed mother of 3 whose husband had died in the Pacific Campaign 2 years earlier. Before the war, she had run a small restaurant in Osaka, known throughout her neighborhood for her kindness and the care she put into every dish. Her philosophy was simple but profound. Food prepared without love is just fuel. Food prepared with love becomes medicine for the soul. When the war consumed everything, when her business was seized and repurposed, when her sons were drafted and sent away, Fumiko found herself assigned to military auxiliary work, cooking in the mess facilities for occupation forces, and in those final chaotic months, for the prison camps that were being rapidly evacuated and reorganized as Allied forces advanced. She wasn't naive. Fumiko knew what had happened in those camps. She had heard the whispers of starvation rations, of beatings, of prisoners reduced to skeletons, of death marches and casual cruelty. The propaganda had painted the Allied soldiers as demons, as subhuman monsters who deserved no mercy. But Fumiko had also lost too much to hate anymore. Her husband was gone. Her eldest son had died at Guadalcanal. Her 2 younger sons were missing, presumed dead. The war had taken everything from her except her hands and her ability to cook. And now, in late August 1945, just days after the Emperor's surrender broadcast, she and 5 other women were being ordered to prepare food for a group of British POWs who had just been liberated from a nearby camp, men who had endured 3.5 years of systematic brutality at the hands of her countrymen. The order came from a young lieutenant named Takahashi, a rigid, by-the-book officer who embodied everything that had gone wrong with the military culture. He treated the women with open contempt, barking orders as if they were soldiers rather than civilian auxiliaries. "These prisoners are to be fed," he announced coldly in the makeshift kitchen that morning. "The Allied authorities demand it. You will prepare rice, vegetables, and whatever protein we can spare. You will serve them. You will not speak to them. You will not make eye contact. They are still the enemy, surrender or not. We show them this mercy only because we are ordered to, not because they deserve it. Do you understand?" Fumiko and the other women nodded silently, but their hands were shaking. They had seen these prisoners from a distance, skeletal figures who could barely walk, eyes hollow with trauma, bodies covered in sores and evidence of torture. These men had every reason to attack them, to take revenge on the first Japanese faces they could reach. The women expected violence. They expected to be assaulted, perhaps killed. One of the younger women, Keiko, was crying quietly as she washed rice. "They're going to hurt us," she whispered. "They're going to kill us for what was done to them." But Fumiko, who had already lost everything that mattered, felt something different stirring in her chest. Not quite courage. She was terrified too. But something deeper. A stubborn refusal to let hatred have the final word. "We will cook for them the way we would cook for our own families," she said quietly but firmly, her voice cutting through the kitchen's anxious silence. "We will prepare this food with care, with respect. It's all we can do." Lieutenant Takahashi overheard this and whirled on her with fury. "You presume to show respect to the enemy? To men who killed your husband and sons? You would betray your country's honor by treating these animals as if they were human." The other women froze, terrified. Fumiko met the lieutenant's rage with calm, steady eyes. My country's honor, she said softly, was lost when we forgot that our enemies were human beings. I won't forget again. The lieutenant's face went purple with rage. You are insubordinate. You are a traitor to everything. I am a cook, Fumiko interrupted, her voice still quiet, but unshakable. And I will prepare this food properly. That is what I was ordered to do. That is what I will do. The standoff was electric. The other women held their breath. Lieutenant Takahashi could have her arrested, beaten, worse. But in the chaos of Japan's surrender, with the old order collapsing and Allied forces taking control, his authority was already slipping away. He knew it. After a long, terrible moment, he spat on the ground near her feet and stormed out of the kitchen, shouting back, "Do what you want then. When they attack you, don't expect any help from me." The women worked in near silence after that. But Fumiko's declaration had changed something. They stopped simply following orders and started actually cooking. Fumiko showed them how to wash the rice multiple times until the water ran clear, how to cook it perfectly so that each grain was tender but separate. They carefully chopped vegetables, precious carrots and greens that they'd managed to scavenge. From the devastated supplies, they prepared a thin miso broth with actual care, adding every bit of flavor they could coax from their meager ingredients. They even found some pickled radishes to serve alongside. It wasn't much. By pre-war standards, it was a poverty meal. But it was clean, it was carefully prepared, and it was served on clean plates, which in itself was extraordinary given the chaos of defeat. When the time came to serve the meal, Fumiko insisted on going first. She carried the tray into the room where 37 British soldiers sat on benches, recently bathed and given clean clothes by Allied medical personnel who had arrived just hours before. The soldiers' eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that made her hands shake. These men were so thin that their uniforms hung on them like shrouds. Their faces were masks of suspicion and barely controlled rage. One of them, a sergeant with burn scars covering half his face, stood up abruptly and Fumiko nearly dropped the tray. "Japanese kitchen worker," an Allied translator called out. "You may set down the food and leave." But Fumiko didn't leave. She set down the first tray carefully before a soldier whose hands were trembling, whose eyes were filling with tears at the mere sight of food. She bowed, not the subservient bow that military culture demanded, but the deep, respectful bow of one human being acknowledging another. Then she looked up and, in broken English that she'd learned decades ago in school, she said quietly, "I am sorry for everything." The room went dead silent. The soldiers stared at her. The Allied officers looked shocked. The other Japanese women who had followed her in with more trays stood frozen. This wasn't allowed. This wasn't protocol. This was a Japanese woman apologizing to the men whose lives had been destroyed by her country's military machine. The scarred sergeant spoke first, his voice hoarse from years of screaming and silence. "Why?" he rasped. "Why? Are you sorry? You didn't do this to us." Fumiko's eyes filled with tears. "My countrymen did this. My military. My government. I am part of this. I must carry this shame. I am sorry." Another soldier, younger, his body shaking with emotion, said bitterly, "You think a bow and an apology fix 3 years of hell? You think words matter?" "No," Fumiko said simply. "Words do not fix, but I have only words. And this food, prepared with respect. It is all I have to give." The tension was unbearable. The other women were crying now, tears streaming down their faces as they set down trays of food before soldiers who looked at them with such complex expressions: rage, suspicion, hunger, and something else. Something none of them had expected to see. The British captain in charge, a man named Morrison who had survived the Burma Railway and multiple death marches, spoke up. His voice was shaking. "Men," he said quietly, let's eat." What happened next was something none of the witnesses would ever forget. The soldiers began to eat. And they didn't just eat. They consumed every single grain of rice. They ate slowly at first, carefully, as if they couldn't quite believe the food was real and safe. Then faster. They scraped their plates clean. They drank every drop of miso broth. They ate the pickled radishes, the vegetables, everything. And as they ate, something extraordinary happened. The first soldier began to cry. Then another. Then another. Soon, nearly every man in that room was weeping openly as they ate. These were hardened combat veterans, men who had survived unspeakable horrors, men who had watched their friends die of starvation and disease. and they were crying over a simple bowl of rice. Captain Morrison set down his empty bowl with shaking hands. He looked at Fumiko, who stood frozen by the doorway, tears streaming down her own face. "In 3.5 years," he said, his voice breaking, "in 3.5 years, we were given rotting rice full of maggots and stones. We were given spoiled fish that made us sick. We were given food thrown at us like we were dogs. No, worse than dogs. We watched our friends die of starvation while the guards laughed. We were told daily that we were subhuman, that we deserved nothing, that we were garbage to be worked to death." He paused, struggling to continue. "This meal you've prepared, this simple, clean, carefully cooked meal, this is the first time since we were captured that anyone has treated us like human beings. The first time someone has served us food prepared with dignity, with care." Fumiko couldn't speak. She could barely breathe. The scarred sergeant stood up, walked over to her, and did something that shocked everyone in the room. He bowed to her, a deep, respectful bow. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for remembering that we're human." One by one, the other soldiers stood. One by one, they bowed to Fumiko and the other women. Men who had every reason to hate, to seek revenge, to lash out in rage. They were bowing in gratitude, thanking them. Some of them were saying "arigato," thank you in Japanese, words they'd learned as prisoners but never expected to use in gratitude. The Allied officers were crying now too. The other Japanese women had collapsed to their knees, sobbing. The room was filled with the sound of weeping. British soldiers, Japanese women, everyone broken open by this moment of unexpected grace. But Fumiko was staring at Captain Morrison with a strange expression. "You said Burma Railway?" she asked quietly in her broken English. He nodded. "Yes. I was captured in Singapore, sent to work on the railway. Most brutal experience imaginable." Fumiko's face went pale. "My son," she whispered. "My youngest son, Hiroshi. He was engineer, sent to Burma, to work on railway. Different side, but same railway. I receive letter. He write to me before he say." She struggled to find the words, her English failing her in her emotion. "He say he hate what he must do. He hate the cruelty. He try to help prisoners, in secret. He give his own food. He was caught. He was executed by his own officers for showing mercy." The room went completely still. Captain Morrison stood frozen, staring at her. Your son was killed by the Japanese military for helping us." Fumiko nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He write, 'Mother, I cannot be part of this cruelty. I must remember what you teach me, that all people deserve dignity. If I die for this, I die with honor.'" He was 20 years old. The captain's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on the bench. "We had heard rumors," he said hoarsely. "Rumors of a young Japanese engineer who would slip us extra food, who would warn us when the guards were coming, who would leave medicine hidden in our work areas. The guards caught him. They made us watch, while they executed him. They said it was to show us what happened to traitors. We never knew his name. We never knew." "Hiroshi," Fumiko whispered. "His name was Hiroshi Nakamura." Captain Morrison's face crumpled. He buried his face in his hands and wept like a child. "He saved lives," he choked out. "That medicine he left us, it saved at least a dozen men. We thought he was just one compassionate person in a sea of cruelty. We never knew it cost him everything. We never knew." Fumiko walked forward and, in a gesture that defied all protocol, all social convention, all the boundaries of war and nation and former enmity, she placed her hand gently on the captain's shoulder. "He would be glad," she said softly, "that his sacrifice helped you live, that you survived to go home. He would be glad." The captain looked up at her, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. Recognition, shared grief, shared loss, the acknowledgement that war had taken beloved people from both sides, that suffering wasn't limited to one group, that humanity existed in the most unexpected places. "Your son was a hero," Morrison said firmly, wiping his eyes. "A true hero. He had more courage than most men I've known. And you," his voice broke again, "you have his courage. To stand here, to face us, to serve us with dignity after everything. You have his courage." The scarred sergeant spoke up, his voice rough but sincere. "Ma'am, I was on that railway too. I think your son might have helped me. There was a day when I was sick, dying really, and someone left a packet of rice and some medicine near my sleeping area. The guards didn't see. I always wondered who. I think it might have been him. Other soldiers began speaking up. There was that engineer who warned us about the cave-in. The one who would slow down the work pace when someone was too sick. I remember him, young, always looked troubled, like he didn't want to be. There. Fumiko was openly weeping now, and the soldiers were gathering around her, these men who hours ago had been preparing themselves to hate her, to see her as the enemy. Now they were telling her about her son's courage, about how he had saved lives, about how he had never stopped being human even when the system demanded inhumanity. Lieutenant Takahashi chose that moment to storm back into the room, flanked by 2 other Japanese officers. "What is this disgrace?" he shouted. "You dare to fraternize with the enemy? You dare to—" Captain Morrison stood up, his bearing suddenly that of a commanding officer. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice cold and hard, "you will leave this room. Now. You have no authority over—" "I have every authority." Morrison cut him off. "Japan has surrendered. These men are under my protection now. And this woman," he gestured to Fumiko, "this woman and her colleagues have shown more honor in 1 hour than you've shown in your entire military career. You will leave, or I will have my men remove you." The Allied medical officer who had been standing quietly in the corner stepped forward. "Lieutenant Takahashi," he said formally, "I'm afraid Captain Morrison is correct. The chain of command has changed. These civilians are now under Allied protection. If you have issues with how we manage our personnel, you may file a formal complaint through the appropriate channels." Takahashi's face went through a series of expressions. Rage, humiliation, confusion, fear. The old world was gone. His authority was meaningless. He looked at Fumiko with naked hatred. "You betrayed everything," he spat. "Everything we fought for." Fumiko met his eyes steadily. "No," she said quietly. "You betrayed everything we should have been. My son knew it. He died knowing it, and I will live knowing it." The lieutenant had no response. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Captain Morrison turned back. To Fumiko. "Ma'am, would you and the other ladies please sit with us? There's still some food left and we would be honored if you would share this meal with us." It was an unprecedented request. Japanese women sitting and eating with Allied soldiers, with former prisoners, as equals, as fellow human beings. The other women looked at Fumiko, terrified and uncertain. Fumiko bowed and sat down. The other women, slowly, did the same. For the next hour in that crowded room that smelled of miso, and tears and healing, former enemies broke bread together. The soldiers told their stories. The women told theirs. They discovered shared losses. Almost everyone in that room had lost family members to the war. They discovered shared hopes. Everyone wanted to go home, to rebuild, to find peace. They discovered shared humanity, the thing that war tries so hard to destroy but can never quite extinguish. When it was time for the soldiers to leave for the transport ships that would take them home, Captain Morrison approached Fumiko one last time. "I don't have much," he said, "but I want you to have this." He pressed something into her hand. A small battered photograph of his wife and young daughter in England. "This picture kept me alive in the camps. I want you to have it. To remember that we're all just trying to get back to the people we love. That's all any of us ever wanted." Fumiko looked at the photo, a smiling woman holding a little girl of about 5, and fresh tears rolled down her face. "They are beautiful," she whispered. "You go home to them. You hold them. You tell them about Hiroshi. You tell them about today." "I will," Morrison promised. "I'll tell everyone about today. About you. About your son. About how peace isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering our humanity even in the worst circumstances." The soldiers filed out, but each one stopped to bow to the women, to thank them, to acknowledge them. The scarred sergeant pressed a button from his uniform. Into Fumiko's hand. "It's all I have," he said simply. "But I want you to know that what you did today, what your son did, it matters. It all matters." After they left, Fumiko and the other women sat in the empty room, exhausted and transformed. Keiko, the young woman who had been so terrified that morning, spoke first. "They didn't hurt us," she said wonderingly. "They thanked us. They saw us," another woman added. "They saw us as people." Fumiko clutched the photograph and the button. These small tokens of connection across an abyss of pain and loss. My son's life meant something, she said softly. His death meant something. And today we chose to be human. That's all we can ever do. Choose to be human even when everything tells us to be monsters. In the weeks and months that followed, Captain Morrison kept his promise. He wrote about that day in his letters home, in his official reports, eventually in a memoir that was published years later. He tracked down other survivors of the Burma Railway and collected their stories of Hiroshi Nakamura, the young Japanese engineer who had died trying to help them. He created a memorial fund in Hiroshi's name to support reconciliation efforts between former enemies. Fumiko returned to Osaka, to her destroyed city, and used the skills she had, cooking, compassion, stubborn human decency, to help rebuild. She opened a small soup kitchen that fed anyone who needed it, Japanese or Allied, former soldier or civilian. She never spoke much about that day with the British prisoners. But those who knew her saw how she treated every person who came through her door, with the same careful dignity she had shown those soldiers. Years later, in 1955, Captain Morrison returned to Japan as part of a Veterans Reconciliation delegation. He found Fumiko, now in her 50s, still running her small restaurant. They embraced like old friends, because that's what they had become. Two people who had chosen, in a moment of unimaginable pain and possibility, to see each other's humanity. You changed my life that day, Morrison told her through a translator. You and your son. You reminded me that revenge and hatred are easy. Compassion and forgiveness. Those are the hard things. Those are the things that make us human. Fumiko smiled, and it was a smile that carried the weight of everything she had lost and everything she had gained. Hiroshi taught me, she said simply. He taught me that one person choosing to be kind, choosing to be human, it is like a light in the darkness, maybe small light. But even small light breaks the darkness. This is what we forget about war, about conflict, about the divisions that tear us apart. We forget that on every side of every battle, there are people who are just trying to hold on to their humanity. We forget that the courage to show compassion to those who have hurt us is far greater than the courage to strike back. We forget that simple acts, a bowl of rice prepared with care, a moment of acknowledgement, a choice to see the person rather than the enemy. These simple acts can break cycles of hatred that have lasted generations. Fumiko Nakamura and her son Hiroshi remind us that we always have a choice. Even in the darkest circumstances, even when the world tells us to hate, even when we have every reason to seek revenge, we can choose differently. We can choose to prepare the food with care. We can choose to bow with respect. We can choose to see the human being in front of us rather than the uniform or the flag or the history. And here's the truly revolutionary part. That choice doesn't just change the person we show compassion to. It changes us. Those British soldiers went home transformed by forgiveness. Fumiko was transformed by the courage to offer it. The soldiers who witnessed it were transformed by the possibility of it. Ripples of grace spreading out from one meal, one moment, one choice to be human. So let me ask you, where in your life are you holding on to hatred? Where are you seeing an enemy instead of a person? Where are you choosing the easy path of judgment and revenge instead of the hard path of compassion and understanding? Because the truth that Fumiko and Hiroshi teach us is this. Compassion isn't weakness. Forgiveness isn't surrender. Seeing your enemy's humanity doesn't mean condoning their actions. It means refusing to let their actions turn you into something you're not. It means holding on to your own humanity so tightly that it becomes a light in the darkness, a light that can guide others home. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think differently about forgiveness and humanity and the choices we make in difficult times, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me about a time when someone showed you unexpected compassion or when you chose to show it to someone else. And subscribe to this channel because these are the stories that matter. The stories that remind us who we can be at our best. The stories that prove that even in humanity's darkest hours, the light never goes out completely. It just needs someone brave enough to keep it burning. Remember Fumiko Nakamura. Remember Hiroshi Nakamura. Remember that a bowl of rice and a moment of grace can change the world, one person at a time.